Hello and welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the 6 series that I finished in 2024. Yes, we are still talking about last year. I realised I hadn't done this one and I wanted to talk about this because I enjoyed the finale of every single series that I finished in 2024. That's not something you can say too often, so I want to make the most of that and talk about 6 series that I thoroughly enjoyed from beginning to end and that I really highly recommend. And so starting off with The Wolf Den by Elodie Harper. I didn't start this in 2024, but I did finish it. I read book 2 and book 3 in 2024. Book 2 in particular was absolutely astonishing. The House of the Golden Door is one of my top 20 books of all time. It was just simply extraordinary. I'm a character-driven reader. That was a character-driven series. The House of the Golden Door has got Amara in a very different situation than she is in book 1. I can't say any more for spoilers, but so I wasn't quite sure where the series was going, but the direction it did go was so satisfying and tense, and just Elodie Harper did it in such a wonderful way that continued what you love about book 1, the sisterhood, camaraderie, striving for some agency, and then just adds so much more. And it was just so good. I thought I'd enjoy it because my brother Ed had read the series before me, and he said that I will love where it's going. And we kind of know each other. Even if we do have some different reading tastes with different books, we usually know what the other brother is going to think. I guess we know our reading taste quite well after talking to each other about books for the last 10 years. But yeah, this is a series that I really highly recommend. Historical fiction that I think transcends the genre in the sense that it would appeal, I believe, to people who don't read historical fiction. If you read fantasy, I think there's a lot to find and love here. If you read fiction, same here, and non-fiction, and more. Of course, no book is for everyone, but I think this has a wider audience than most, and it is a series that if you like it, you will love it. And so there's series I often personally want to dive into because I want to find my new favourite series, and The Wolf Den, I think, could be yours. And then talking about favourite series, next up I have got the Adan trilogy, which kicks off with The Way of Adan. This is published by Dr. Fantasy himself, Philip Chase. So full transparency, I'm lucky enough to call Philip Chase a friend, but I do not believe that reflects my opinions on this series. I think I can still be honest. And in my opinion, this is a wonderful mix of classic and modern fantasy. You've got kind of that ethereal sense to the world and nature and the setting as a character, a bit like the first book of Earthsea that I've read by Ursula Le Guin. It has that kind of nostalgic feel of magic that we love about fantasy, but then it's got the modern characters, the gritty characters. You're not quite sure who's in the right, who's in the wrong. They each have their own motivations and desires. They're not being evil for evil's sake. They are multi-dimensional and they operate in their own separate realms. It doesn't just feel like they're brought together by plot or coincidence. It feels natural and organic. And in my opinion, each book gets better. The Way of Adan sets fantastic foundations. It's a bit smaller scale and it leads to a great conclusion. And we've got the classic kind of boy in a village dragged out of his natural habitat into the big bad world. We've got a bit of a chosen one trope, but it's done so well. I love the subversions to the tropes that Philip Chase takes on in this series. Book 2 ends kind of how you'd expect an end of a fantasy trilogy to end. So I was very intrigued to see what was going to happen with book 3, and then book 3 blew me out the water. I had no idea what to expect, but it was even better than I could have imagined, and it is personally my favourite of the trilogy. And so I often think the most important part of a series is the end, because you could enjoy the whole series, but if you don't like the end, it will taint everything else. Whereas if you don't enjoy the first one, but then it ends well, you often want to read it again. So much hinges on that ending, and all the books I read in 2024, which were finales of series, luckily for me, were great. And so I really enjoyed Return to Adan, and I highly recommend this self-published fantasy series, the best combination of modern and classic you can find out there. And then after that, I've got, this is a bit of a strange one, I've got after the finale of the Arthurian Tales by Giles Christian. But whilst it is part of a series, this is also a standalone. There are basically 3 standalones, Lancelot, Camelot and Arthur, but in the same world with some recurring characters, but completely different main focus, and you could read them on their own. I love all 3, so I recommend reading them all. but you could conceivably read them on their own. They're standalones that operate with their own wrapped up story, which is lovely because a palate cleanser, this is the series to go to. You don't have to binge them. You can read one, great palate cleanser, off to the next, and Malazan or whatever you want to dive into. That might be a bit longer. But Arthur, this moved me so much. It just shows that the Arthurian legend can still be done uniquely and with a fresh take on it. We follow two perspectives, Beren, an old veteran of a warrior who's part of a mercenary group. But this all turns a bit sour when he is tasked to kill a boy and he turns against his comrades to save this boy because he thinks that he could save England. And then we have got Arthur as a child, showing the virtues and vices that he obtains that will shape him as the man of myth and legend that echoes through history to today. I thought that was a really unique take on Arthur, especially as he really wasn't the main focus of Lancelot and Camelot. I really like how Giles Christian gave him this central focus here. And in such a unique way, following him as a child was just done wonderfully. And yeah, another series that I thoroughly enjoyed. A bit more historical fiction on the table, and who doesn't love an Arthurian legend? And now, before I continue, I need to talk about The Fury of the Gods. I haven't included it in the 6 because I might be considered biased, but this was the conclusion of the Bloodsworn saga. And what a conclusion it was. Papa Gwyn delivered a huge climactic finale, but also, of course, it's got the heart in there. That's the most important part. I love epic action sequences and epic conclusions and massive battles, but they don't mean anything if you're not invested in the story. And Papa Gwyn invested me in the characters. I wanted to see so much vengeance. There are so many terrible characters in this, but I love also that you understand motivations of some others. They're caught on the wrong side. You don't want anything bad to happen to them, but for vengeance to be done to some, others must be harmed that may not deserve it. And so the idea of the greater good, and it comes into play again with the Bloodsworn saga. And I just love this finale of The Fury of the Gods, and I'm very proud of Papa Gwyn for this incredible finale to the Bloodsworn saga. But then next up, I have got The Silence of the Gales. So the finale of this trilogy was released in 2024, The Voyage Home. Now, The Silence of the Gales is one of my top 10, 15 books of all time. The sequel, The Women of Troy, is exceptional. Maybe a tiny notch down from Silence of the Gales, but exceptional. And then The Voyage Home, for me, wasn't up to that same level, but it was still a really good story and one that I really enjoyed reading. I think I just had very high hopes, of course, because Pat Barker's previous two books, these first two installments of the series, are probably my two favourite mythological retellings of all time. So The Voyage Home was a little bit disappointing, but on reflection, still a great read. And again, subversions to Greek retellings were just manipulated perfectly. The Silence of the Gales is a whole new level in my opinion, and I recommend this to everyone. You could read this as a standalone, but I recommend reading this and The Women of Troy together, and then you could leave The Voyage Home, because that's kind of a separate story as a continuation. It's a bit like a long epilogue with some different characters. But Silence of the Gales and Women of Troy, what are two books they are? Please pick up this series. In my opinion, the best mythological retellings out there. I've read quite a few. You can see that shelf there, plus some others that I haven't got physically. But yeah, I think that these are just absolutely masterful. The characterization is just exceptional. Pat Barker at her best. My brother Ed says this is the best prose he's ever read as well, because of how efficient it is and how immersive and how much it reflects the psychology of the characters. It really is a study of art. It is a masterclass in writing. And so there we go. A few reasons to read Silence of the Gales. I hope you pick it up. And it was actually, I think, the first or second review I did on this channel. So maybe a bit of sentimentality there as well. And then I have got, another magnificent trilogy. I've got the Gaul Song trilogy, beginning with The Children of Gods and Fighting Men by Shauna Lawless. The finale, The Land of the Living and the Dead, was released in 2024, as well as two novellas, which I also read in 2024. The novellas are probably the best novellas I've ever read, because not only do they just carry on what you love about the series, but they add more, but in a way that you don't have to read them to enjoy the main series. It just adds a bit of background, a bit of flavour, a bit of richness that was just wonderfully done. Shauna Lawless understood the assignment and she completed it to the highest level. But then talking about the main series, the main body of 3 works, starting with the Children of Gods and Fighting Men, then continuing with the Words of Kings and Prophets, and finishing with The Land of the Living and the Dead. These are 3 great books that combine history and mythology. We are thrust into late 10th century, early 11th century Ireland as we see the conflict between the Vikings and the Irish culminating in a conflict, in a war. But there is so many political machinations along the way. I adored it. Gormla, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, I'm so sorry, is one of the best characters I've come across in the last 4 or 5 years. And that leads me on to the other part of this, the other aspect of this series is the mythological aspect. There is Irish mythology at the core of the story. We've got 2 ancient groups that can live longer than the average person, and there is an enmity between them, and they have different powers. But it's believed one has been destroyed and the other is victorious, despite their own power diminishing. But, of course, the enemy is not gone. Gormla is a survivor. And so we know this conflict is going to come to a head again. And it's just done so well. I love how we've got the tension of, are they going to discover one another? We've got characters who are just rooting for vengeance, others for their own power, who you hate. And others that, like Gormla, it's such an interesting journey where she's striving for the survival of her son, for herself, for her family, against those who have killed those she loves, which we can understand, but she does some terrible things to get what she wants. And so it poses a question to us: how far can you go for that journey? But yeah, wonderful series, another one that I highly recommend. And then I think the last one that I'm talking about today, it is the finale to Stephen Fry's Greek mythological myths. Mythological myths? What am I talking about? Stephen Fry's Greek mythology. There we go. So this is the 4th instalment. You can see the other 3 there. I have got a review coming out on the channel at some point soon talking about the entire quartet. Mythos is the beginning of Greek mythology, the foundations. Heroes is a lot about the demigods. Troy, of course, is about the story of Troy. And then we finish with the Odyssey, which is, of course, of much more relevance now than maybe a few months ago due to the excitement for Christopher Nolan's upcoming film. Everyone I've seen is very excited about that, and so I think a lot of people are going to be picking up the Odyssey, and this is one you should go to, in my opinion. Of course, there are many others, but this is really accessible with sharp wit. Stephen Fry is genius. He carries you through a story, and whilst he is very witty and dry and satirical, he also injects a serious tone at times as well. It can be moving, and it shows the motivations of these characters. You feel attached to them. Of course, there's only a certain length that can be stretched to, because these are characters that Stephen Fry is still telling the story of the Odyssey. He's not making it modern. He's not changing the inherent story. He's not making them more relatable or more loving or more lovable. Definitely not. Many of these characters are detestable and they have questionable motives. Like Odysseus, what are you doing? Just go home, you know? But it's still really, really enjoyable, and there's some fantastic scenes in this book. Stephen Fry delivers once again. As my brother would say, he'd make a great postman. But there we go. They are the series I finished in 2024. What a great mix. Some mythology, some fantasy, some historical fiction. Most of them have gone down as some of my favourite series of all time now, from beginning to end. Of course, there's so many books out there. I often don't finish series that I'm not loving. And so, of course, that is a factor. But it shows that these series were just ended really, really well. I can trust these authors, and I'll probably be reading most of these at some point in my life. It is just absolutely wonderful, and I cannot wait to see what each of these authors puts out next. But please let me know what you finished in 2024, and let me know your favourite series that you completed. Everyone, thank you so much for watching. Carpe diem.